This is not the main event of the evening, that is still to come. So after Sandy and I have spoken for a few minutes, there'll be a chance to recharge a glass or fill up a plate and then come back again, and we will have our screening of some of the Speaking of Speech short films and panel discussion from some of those who've been involved in making them. So I hope that your stamina is still good, even after crossing time zones in many cases, or after long nights of having to cram marking in until 2 a.m. or the many things that you've had to do to get here. I hope you're still feeling strong for a little longer. The first thing I want to say is I have to apologize for kvetching. For those, some of you might know that word, for complaining, as I have done, about some of you individually and collectively to my wife. And as you know, the things that you say to your spouse don't really count as your feelings. They're more just things that you share in a rash moment. And when I've done that over the past couple of weeks, my wife knows me well enough to say the right thing. And she tried at first to say, but remember, it was just like this in 2019. She didn't say you were just like this in 2019. The scenario, it was just like this in 2019, which of course is the last time that Sandy and I convened a conference together at the Fugard Theatre, a lifetime and a pandemic ago. A number of you were there, and it feels necessary to sort of make explicit the connection between that event and this, and the journey from that event to this, because of all that has happened in our collective and individual lives. I'll talk a little bit more about the connection between the two events, and I suppose the broader intellectual, what could we call it, project, maybe sounds too specific, journey, before handing over to Sandy. But then I thought, before I do that, I want to share a couple of other things that my wife shared with me. The second is, and this is after I was complaining on another occasion, she tried a different tack. And she said, it was just like this last time. And this time, even though you don't have the wonderful team at the Fugard, you've been telling me how amazing everybody is at Spier. And so I'm sure that between you and Sandy, and she knows that Sandy and I are best friends as conveners and academic colleagues, it's going to be great. And so that gives me an opportunity to say that she was correct, and to say thank you to Sandy, who is a hero in our household and in my mind, as a buddy and a co-convener. It's been such a privilege and in fact a great professional highlight of my career to work with her on these two conferences, and various things connected to them. And also to say thank you to Spier. In their absence, the wonderful team, some of them you might meet, Kumin and Sandra and Jolene and various others, and the many staff members at Spier that a number of you have met. And then with Spier, who are partners in this journey, we have other partners who I guess drift into the category of sponsors, who have very generously contributed to making this event possible. One of those is Legacy Underwriting Managers, which supports the Tsikinya-Chaka Centre. Another is Easy Equities. You will learn more about Easy Equities courtesy of Carl, who's sitting at the back when he leads the wine tasting in a couple of evenings. So make sure you get to know Carl before then, as well as at the event. And we'll tell you more about Easy Equities and the wonderful work that they do. They're also involved in supporting and sponsoring the Speaking of Speech project, which you'll see more about just now. So thank you to Easy Equities. To Wits and UCT, who have in their own ways made a contribution. To Team Wits, who have come from Joburg. I think if there's a prize, we win the prize for representation. And to many others who've supported our work, including the Humboldt Foundation in Germany, who have made it possible indirectly for Ifeolua Boluwade to be here. So there are lots of formal and informal partnerships and networks that have brought us here, and that's really thrilling. But that thrill was not enough to stop me from complaining further to my wife. So as I continue to complain about your many needs as a collective body, although individually I love you all, she said to me, but you know what? It might seem like it's really tough to manage the logistics, but at least you don't have to write a paper. And it was when she said those magical words that I realized I have no grounds for complaint whatsoever, because you have all, apart from putting your lives on hold and cramming your work lives into a busy space and emailing from the plane and staying up late at night in your rooms here at Spier doing your work, and thinking about family responsibilities and many other things, you have brought these beautiful gifts of your papers, which we will enjoy together. And it really is a special thing to think about this community that we've created and what we'll be able to enjoy over the next few days. So thank you for doing that. And I know that insofar as you need a reward for the effort of the journey and the effort of the preparation of your papers, part of the reward is the intellectual pleasure of our gathering. Part of the reward is also, of course, the beautiful Western Cape, Spier and the winelands generally. And so you can all now say, and have engraved on your tombstones, as those neoclassicists did many years ago, "Et in Arcadia ego." I too have seen paradise, which we enjoyed this morning on our mini tour, and which others of you who've been here already for a few days have enjoyed elsewhere. But of course, as I say those words, I can't help but reflect on how they are usefully ambiguous, because they also act as a kind of memento mori, right? If those who have been dead, who are dead, have seen paradise, that means that even in paradise lurks death, or the serpent, or choose your religious mythological perspective. But even in paradise sits sorrow, suffering, sin, however you want to phrase that. And we are acutely aware of that here at Spier, as you would have heard Jessica in her talk earlier. There's a strong sense of the Spier team, I think, and their sense of responsibility to the history that has passed in this particular place, which kind of hovers, I guess, in amongst the beauty of it. And it's true of the Cape Winelands and of the Western Cape more generally. So it seems like it's impossible for us to do Shakespeare, however we understand doing Shakespeare, to think about discussing Shakespeare in aesthetic, artistic, and other terms, without thinking about that process in ethical terms, in terms of responsibilities to our fellow citizens, fellow human beings. And that, I think, is what drove the Shakespeare and Social Justice Conference in 2019. And it's also what has driven this conference in many ways as well. Now, I said I'd talk a little bit about the connection between the two. The one thing I want to say is utilitarian, if we're talking about Shakespeare and use, which is about publications. All of our ears prick up when we think about publications. So Sandy and I have encouraged all of you to add to the brag table, which we will set up. I guess this is going to become the bragging table over the next few days. We might move the speaker to make it more accessible. But if you have any recent publications that you'd like to add, it would be great to share those. And Sandy and I will be leading the charge by shamelessly placing on the table some of the publications that emerged from the previous conference. A number of the delegates who are here were attended and published in the special issue of Shakespeare Bulletin, special volume of Shakespeare in Southern Africa, and Global Shakespeare and Social Injustice, coming out with Bloomsbury in 4 days. Yeah, 1st of June. We thought we'd have copies, but we don't. And so we have similar plans and ambitions for not the proceedings, I shouldn't use that word, but for publications that emerge out of this conference. 1, possibly 2 volumes of Shakespeare in Southern Africa. Also, we hope a proposed special issue of Shakespeare Bulletin on African Shakespeares. And Multicultural Shakespeares has also invited us to curate a special issue for that journal as well. So just to sort of flag, I suppose, the life of these papers into the world beyond. We are filming our keynote speakers tomorrow morning and on Friday morning. And we will be sharing those beautiful videos with the world. Unfortunately, we couldn't afford to film everybody. So, so your beautiful gifts, your papers, will have to find their audience as a readership rather than as a viewership in the weeks and months and years ahead. And we look very much forward to that. On the note of our keynote speakers, I want to say to Ruben and to Jyotsna, we are so very excited and privileged to have you here as our keynotes. Thank you for accepting so early, so many months ago, and I dare say for enabling us to draw many of the people who are here at this conference. Not that I want you to think of yourselves as magnets or fishing hooks or something, but it really is a great privilege for us to have you here. We'll be speaking at and about you, to and about you at great length before your keynote talks tomorrow and the next day. So the last thing I want to say before I hand over to Sandy, who's going to talk in a little bit more detail about our topic and some of the issues and themes that might emerge from it, that we are both aware of what might emerge as the slightly absurd position of thinking about Shakespeare in purely utilitarian terms. So we're very pleased, as we've been saying to some of the delegates, that there are a number of papers that have been offered or will be offered at this that gathering that that challenge some of the terms of reference of the conference, which is really invigorating as well. I was joking with a friend of mine not too long ago. It sounds like a silly conversation to have, but we actually were having a conversation about the Russians in the 19th century, and talking about the old debate, Boots versus Shakespeare, which is better, Boots or Shakespeare? And I said, if I had the choice, I would choose Boots, probably rhetorically exaggerating what would have been the case. And then we got into talking about the topic of our conference, and it emerged out of that if you tease that out logically, then I would want to sort of use Shakespeare to make Boots, or use Shakespeare towards Boots, if the Shakespeare Towards An End is seen in those terms. And of course that makes it slightly risible. So it's a useful kind of, if not mockery, at least a provocation. And we're very pleased that some of you have responded to the call for papers in terms that challenge the premises of the call for papers, which is very pleasing. I think I've spoken at probably too great a length, so I'm going to hand over to Sandy, who will tell us more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello everyone. So I would just like to add my warm welcome to all of you, because many of you have travelled and have chosen very consciously to be here. Many of you have crossed an ocean. Some of you have just driven down the road from home. Or some of you have kind of done a version of both. I mean, David Skulbeck has, where are you, David? You crossed an ocean to be here, but home is just, Stellenbosch is where you did your undergraduate, yes? Yes, so it's kind of travelling far and coming home.
No,
welcome.
It's extraordinary. Thank you very much.
And welcome to all of you who have chosen consciously. We're delighted. And of course the paradox of coming into such a beautiful space with its very conscious reminders about a disturbing history, as we were told, and given a sense of today in Jessica's talk, as Chris has said, is that it confronts us too about what is troubling about a life that is lived in the midst of inequality and dramatically uneven access to the good life. Disturbing though it is, it seems that the confrontation also has the potential to sharpen the focus in some way. And as we gather here to explore the possibilities of what Shakespeare Towards an End, as we ended up thinking of the kind of key focus as a conscious theme, to reflect on what it is that Shakespeare's work might contribute to a life that is lived with purpose. The invitation that I think Chris and I have is to hold in our awareness the complexity of this place. In many ways, this year's theme follows on from that previous conference on Shakespeare and social justice, and in a sense extends it somewhat, or drives it perhaps a bit further in inviting colleagues to probe the way that Shakespeare has been taken up in theatre practice, in the classroom, in scholarship, and the sense of purpose that informs these engagements with Shakespeare here and now. Some speakers, as we will experience in the coming days, will challenge the validity of an approach to Shakespeare that anticipates an end. That is to say, harnessing Shakespeare for some kind of objective, rejecting it as a slip into utilitarianism that has no place in creative practice, actually. Some will invite us to consider the value of journeys without destination, and to recognize that, truth be told, there is no end in sight, in fact. Others will ask us to recognize the harmful ways that Shakespeare has already been used, conscripted into racist and sexist and homophobic objectives. And we'll get to consider the spuriousness of tropes of degeneration and so on. Others will invite us to think about the inevitability of loss in an embattled world. And we will all be invited to consider the question of how to respond. Evident in so much of what is planned for these days is the value of enlisting Shakespeare into new conversations. Whether it be with some of his own contemporaries, or even a predecessor such as Cervantes, or later writers, poets, dramatists, Robert Browning, Herbert Clomo, Jamaica Kincaid, Margaret Atwood, and Femi Oshofisam, and the many creative practitioners who address themselves to more recent contexts. We will get to think about the trickster figure in Yoruba mythology, on the iconography of northern Ghana, and how these are put into play with Hamlet's antics to critique colonial regimes of power. And in all of this, the thing that strikes me is that these many ends to which Shakespeare has been conscripted, for better and for worse, we get to think about the new directions that this work has taken us to. You can see that Chris and I found it really rewarding to see the directions which speakers, which you all have chosen to take, the ways in which you chose to take up our prompts. And we are so excited by the many wonderful offerings that lie ahead of us this week. I want to say that the conviction underpinning the strands of inquiry that we aim to articulate in our what we hoped was quite an open formulation of Shakespeare Towards an End is that the Shakespeare that demands our attention here and now has become a many-headed monster. I'm not sure if it's quite fair to put it quite like that. So let me say it's become a complex, multifarious, rewarding, and also infuriating cultural phenomenon, precisely because of these unanticipated, extraordinary travels. Though I need to also acknowledge, as I stand here, that it may be that Shakespeare is not the agent and maybe not even the object of these travels at all, that it's only a commodification, that there's little resemblance or perhaps even little relevance to the playwright himself, as one of our delegates, I think, will insist. But that said, there's no doubt that there are countless communities around the world who have laid claim to him, and through their creative and critical imaginations have made him their own and have filled his sails with the gentle breath that even Prospero could not possibly have imagined, and have allowed him to move well beyond, to far and wide, and I celebrate that. So, the other thing that I'd like to say is that these travels, these new imaginings, they're always specifically located. And as we think about these journeys with Shakespeare into new terrains of inquiry, into new spaces, and also into the very pressing concerns of this moment, I invite us to hold in our awareness the question always of who this multifaceted Shakespeare might be for. And that is to say, it's not just a question of Shakespeare's provenance, what that might be, but also what and where his purchase might be in this moment. Who does he serve? And what might we all learn from it? About how to be, about how to make our work the work of service, if not of consequence, in this world, wherever it is that we happen to find ourselves. talking of service and of consequence, I want to take this moment also to acknowledge my co-conspirator in all of this. Chris is a most wonderful, generous, energetic collaborator, as you would imagine. It's been a treat to conjure up this week's events with him, just as it was during the conference in the pre-COVID universe in 2019. Chris is astonishingly effective at making things happen, as I think you know. And his vision and enthusiasm is so infectious that it's very hard not to get excited too. And I'm thinking here not just of the conference itself, but also of the vision that Chris has for new directions for Shakespeare studies in South Africa, for the need for a multilingual approach that acknowledges a much more capacious sense of what it means to engage Shakespeare in this space. And I so look forward to where you take us, Chris, in this intellectual journey. So let me just end by saying thank you. Thank you all for choosing to be part of these conversations, for your rich and sometimes provocative contributions, for your warmth and for your presence. We're so thrilled that you decided to join us, a decision which for some of you involved very long journeys of your own. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
If you've done the maths, it's actually been 4 years since 2019. We think COVID gives us an excuse for missing out what would have been the correct year to have this conference in 2022, because the Shakespeare Society in Southern Africa is constitutionally mandated, you could say, to have a general congress, which for much of the society's existence has taken the form of an academic conference every 3 years. So these, as you would have seen in the branding, these are triennial congresses. I feel like I need an imaginary big ribbon and an imaginary pair of scissors to cut the ribbon to say, I think we can. Oh, there you go, thank you very much. I'm in a box. We declare the 13th Triennial Congress of the Shakespeare Society of Southern Africa.